Okay, well, thank you for coming. So thank you, Anna, also for offering to give the talk. It's nice to be able to share a bit what I've been doing. So I'm going to talk about how forest management can or cannot be a solution to climate change. So I start by explaining a bit why forest management should be or could be a solution to climate change. Then we'll talk about carbon with a zoom on substitution and the drivers, and then we'll move on to climate because it's a lot about carbon. So to start with some context, that's forest in Europe. As you see, there's a lot of it. It's in Europe 47% of the land area with a lot of heterogeneity and very different styles of forest from in different climates. The forest in Europe is highly managed. It's about 95% managed and 73% actively. It's managed mainly for wood production, with the four main producers being Sweden, Finland, Germany, and France. So very intensive and industrial production in Sweden and Finland mainly. And the wood sector is pretty important with over Europe around 400,000 companies. But on top of wood production, that's the main economic motivation for management, there are also other ecosystem services, we call them, that are provided by the forest. So their regulation or provision or support. So for example, they support biodiversity. That's very important for all society, and regulation of water in terms of quantity and quality of the water flow. But since the Kyoto Protocol in the 90s, there are two more services that are expected from forest. Climate regulation and carbon sequestration. And as you can see here, so you have in black and gray for total energies. So in light in gray, you have the targets for the fraction of renewables over total energy. So you see the expectations that, well, we want more renewable energy. But if we focus on heat, because within energy you also have electricity, and within heat, electricity energy for heat, it's mainly wood, the renewables. And see that wood is expected to go from 10% of all energy for heat to around 20% in 2020. So there are a lot of expectations from European forest in the next decades. So is this really the solution to climate change? So let's see about why these wood energy targets. So first, the main motivation is about biogenic carbon. So you know that trees do photosynthesis. There are outflux also of carbon through autotrophic and heterotrophic respiration. But through photosynthesis, the trees, they store carbon. And when we cut the trees, when we harvest them to do something, we will eventually, at the end of the lifetime of the product, we will emit this carbon. But it's carbon that will be reabsorbed when the forest grows up again, assuming that the forest remains a forest. So that's the basis for the hypothesis of carbon neutrality that's often used to call for more wood energy. Except that when you use carbon, you also do other operations. So you transform the carbon, then you use the products that you've made, and in the end of the life you might have also some other emissions. So in the end, that's just an illustration, but in the end, the balance of using wood for energy, it's positive. You use energy in the end. And the reason for more energy is that, okay, we emit energy, but we emit less than if we would have made, for example, here, a building out of cement and iron. Because you also have emissions from fossil fuel extraction, and often you have more emissions from the manufacturing section, and you don't sequester. Well, you haven't emitted so much here, but you have the hypothesis is that you have a forest that is older, so that will sequester less. So here you have what's called substitution. That's assumed to be the reason why it's the avoided emissions from using wood instead of something else. So that was the main reason for all the policies today to increase wood harvest and wood use. So now I'm going to show you an example of a carbon balance a bit detailed that I did in a previous study for France. So in a carbon balance, you have four sections. So the biogenic carbon, it's counting how much carbon goes into the forest. Then forest management. So what do you do with the forest? Do you cut it or not? Then transformation and use, what do you do with the wood that you've harvested? And then what is the reference? How many emissions are you avoiding? So to do this, I use the National Forest Inventory data that it's a grid over France, and for each plot you have the characteristics of the forest in terms of species and dimensions and age. So from this data we can build gross relationships. So here, for example, you see for all the oaks in France the relationship of height versus stand age. So from this data we can reconstruct, for example, here fertility classes. So here each point gets assigned a fertility class. And so from the analysis of this data we can build gross relationships. So the model that I built here is based on relationships for the evolution of diameter and the evolution of volume, that both depend on the fertility of the stand, its density, and its development stage, so the age. So from this we can project over 20-30 years the growth, the evolution of the French forest. Then we have to describe which forest are we going to cut and when are we going to cut them. Geoffrey?
Excuse me, for fertility, soil fertility?
Well, it's empirical, so it's implicit. It's just we don't know why. We don't know if it's because of soil. We don't know because if it's because of climate. But we know that this plot grows fast. So this one, it will follow this line. It's all empirical. It's all very implicit.
No, I was confused with reproduction. Sorry.
Yeah, no, this is very empirical. So then we have to decide which of all the plots you saw on the graph are going to be harvested and how and when. So for this, we defined categories. We assigned categories to all the plots based on three characteristics: on the diameter, the density, and the exploitability. We defined for each species and fertility class three limits, three thresholds in diameter, exploitability, and density. So the forests that have a diameter that is above what is expected for this species, we assume, well, they haven't been managed, they haven't been cut, harvested. So, okay, their harvest delayed. Their owners, they don't care about harvesting. Maybe they go hunting. I don't know. They are not interested. Then you have the ones that have an exploitability limit that is too high, basically in the mountain. We assume they won't be harvested neither because it's not exploitable, whatever their dimensions. Then the ones that have a density index that is over a threshold, we assume, okay, maybe they will be harvested, but the owners are not interested in the thinning. That the operations that you do, you take the ugly ones, so the good ones can grow better. So we assume that these owners, they are not interested in regular actions, but they will still harvest to have the money in the end. And then you have all the ones that are within the thresholds that we assume are actively managed. So the owners do the thinnings regularly to increase the quality of the wood, and they will harvest when the time comes. So the interest of categorizing the forest like this, so well, first the result, so just to see that it makes sense. So there are the regions of France. You see that in the Alps, so these are the big regions and you have smaller regions. So in the Alps, the Pyrenees, the Corsica, where we have mountains, we have a lot of unexploitable. And the other categories don't really follow a pattern, which makes sense because it's based on owner preference and not on geographical, topographical reasons. So the interest of this classification is that we can make scenarios. We can say which plot, from where they are, which plots are we going to cut? Are we going only to keep going as they are? So if we keep going as they are, we do the business as usual. So we harvest and thin these ones. We only harvest the overstocked, and we don't do anything to the two other ones. But we can also define other scenarios. So for example, we can define a scenario where on top of the regular management, we also start thinning these ones that shouldn't be thinned. We can also start harvesting the old ones that people didn't harvest. Or we can say, okay, only the managers that are already active will get rich by the public policy, but we'll give them incentives so they will start harvesting earlier. So we will decrease the harvest diameters of these ones. So with that, we have 4 different scenarios where we target different forests. The idea is that we implicitly represent different public policies, because with the same public policy, you won't motivate the same type of owners. The one that don't even know they have a forest, it happens a lot in France. We have many small forests that have been inherited. Well, even if you increase the price of the wood, they still won't cut. So that's a bit the idea of doing this. Then we have to model. Once we know which forest we have harvested, we need to know what are we going to do with the harvested wood. So for this, we reconstructed the fluxes from national statistics, the fluxes of wood. So there are 3 main uses, 3 destinations from the wood you harvest. Lumber, so that's basically construction, like big wood. Pulp, it will be construct like furniture and paper, and then energy. You see that within the sector, it's pretty efficient. You have a lot of recycling. So the residuals from cutting your big trees, it's used then for pulp and paper. And in the end, a lot of the wood ends up as energy. And finally, the interest in doing this, in this model, is that we can assign a time expectancy to each category of wood. So the wood that is used for construction, we assume it will be re-emitted to the atmosphere over, on average, 50 years. Whereas the one that is directed to energy, over 2 years, it's already it's been re-emitted. And we also need to assign to each of these products a substitution coefficient. So that means, if you remember the graph from before, the picture from before, it means that, for example, here, every time you use 1 cubic meter of wood for energy, you're avoiding 0.5 tons of carbon that would have been emitted if you would have used coal or nuclear in France, or alternative, like other energy. And so the same if you had used alternatives, fossil fuel products, you would have saved these emissions. So these coefficients, I'll talk about them a bit more later in detail. So, and that's the result we find. So for the 3 components, the 3 pools of carbon. So in the forest, in black you have the reference, so the business as usual. You see that the forest in France, if we let it grow and keep managing it the way it is, it keeps sequestering carbon. It's slowing up a bit because the forest is getting older, because a lot of it has been planted right after the Second World War, so it's getting to maturity now. But the sequestration is increasing. Then what you see is that whatever management you do, you're always decreasing the sequestration in the forest, which makes sense because in all the scenarios I showed you, and I forgot to say, the blue, we do all the 3 strategies at the same time. We increase the harvest in the 3 other. So in all strategies, we decrease the sequestration in the forest, which makes sense. You harvest more, you have less carbon in the forest. What you see is that if you increase the harvest in the actively managed or abandoned, you decrease at first, but then you have forests that are younger, so they grow faster. So you tend to catch up. You have an increasing trend. Whereas for the overstocked, so you thin more, so you don't increase the capacity of sequestration of your forest. So you just decrease your sequestration. Then you store also, if you start thinning the overstocked, you only have a little bit of storage in the wood products, because the thinnings, they are aimed for energy. So you don't store it, you just emit it right away to the atmosphere. And same thing for the substitution. For energy, you have a small substitution, whereas for these 2 categories, you have more use as lumber. So you have more substitution and more storage in the wood product. But now, if we sum the three components, that's what we find. So even if we store the three components, where we account for substitution, for the avoided emissions, and for the storage in the product, we still don't reach, or barely at in 2040, the carbon balance of the reference. So what it means is that over this time horizon, the substitution, the avoided emissions from not using fossil fuel, it doesn't compensate for the sequestration you've lost in the forest. Yeah, so that's what I said. And where you cut the wood makes all the difference. Also, you see here that if you increase the harvest in the actively managed forests, you catch up much faster because you have decreased much less the sequestration in the forest. Because these ones that have not been harvested, they are very high stocks of carbon. Whereas these ones are already being managed, so they are stocks of carbon, but while you decrease a little bit, you're not unstocking so much to the atmosphere. So with the abandoned one, it takes longer to catch up. So now I told you a little bit about substitution, but I'd like to go more into the details about this because it's the basis for all the policies and all the motivation for wood use. So where do these coefficients that I showed you come from? Basically, if you remember this graph, these coefficients, they come from this section. So the section of the wood sector, of the industrial sector. So there are people who do life cycle analysis and they take, for example, a wooden building, and they calculate over the lifetime of a building how much carbon emissions are emitted to the atmosphere, how much energy is. And they do the same for an equivalent building that will provide the same function, but that will be made out of cement and iron. And then they do the difference in these two emissions, so the greenhouse gas emissions from the fossil scenario, the greenhouse gas emissions from the wood scenario, and they report that to each unit of wood that you use on top, because maybe in this building you also have some wood, but less. And you have your coefficients that tells you for each unit of wood you use in this scenario on top of this one, you save or you emit on top. But usually they do it it comes as savings. And for each unit of wood, you save that many units of carbon. So the problem, first, it's great. Substitution coefficients are great and they're very popular because they're available. There are a lot of life cycle analysis that compare many different wood products from windows, from a chair to a whole building, different scales, different regions. There are a lot of them. And they're easy to use. You just calculate the difference in harvesting and say, okay, so I have harvested that much difference, so I just multiply and I know how many emissions I have avoided. But there are many downsides too, because they do not account for the forest part, as you saw on the graph. And they're not transparent. You don't know what were the life cycle boundaries that were used. So was the end of life of the product included or not? What are the pathways details? Was it for coal or for nuclear energy? So you can't really use it to your scenario if you don't know in which scenario it was calculated. So that results in a lack of consistency between the calculation and the use. And they are constant in time and space. Whereas, if a substitution coefficient in France is with nuclear energy as an important source of energy, is not the same as in China, clearly. So we know we can do some difference, but most of the time we just use one, and that's it. So here I'm going to show you something that we've prepared that's a bit of a review of what could be taken into account. It's not about taking everything into account, depends on the study, but what to have in mind when you do substitution. So here I put again all the phases that you had in the previous chart. So you have the growth of the above ground biomass, you have the growth of the below ground biomass, the soil and litter, The use of the residues. So when you harvest, what do you do with the branches and all the harvest residues? Do you burn them or do you leave them on site? Then how do you produce your wood product or your alternate product? The use of the product and the end of life. The use, it's very small, because whereas, for example, in a building, the use is the largest component of the emissions over the lifetime of a building. But the difference between a wooden building and a non-wooden building is very small. So for substitution, it doesn't matter too much because they're very close. Whereas the production, for example, it will matter a lot between the two. So now let's look at some examples. So for example, one thing that matters will be biomass removal. That's what I talked about before. If you look at the whole graph from the forest to the end of life of the products, how much biomass you remove and where you remove it, it will affect a lot your above ground biomass, your below ground biomass, and your use of residues. All your in situ section, it will be affected a lot. Another one that's a bit more original for you is the price feedback. But it's very interesting. So you can see it as it's called also the Jevons paradox. So Jevons, he wrote a book in the 19th century, I think, about the coal. So it was the Industrial Revolution, and there was a big increase in the efficiency of the machines. So the expectation was that, well, we have machines that are much more powerful, much more efficient, so we will need less coal, less charcoal, but not. In the end, they were using even more coal because it's more efficient, so the products are cheaper, so you make more, people buy more. And the same thing can happen with wood. If you make more energy from wood, the energy will be cheaper, there will be more available, the energy will be cheaper, well then maybe you will heat your swimming pool instead of not heating it. So in the end you might increase the consumption. So this process also can be very important for some time horizons, for some studies. And so we made a list like this of all the processes that can affect substitution that could be taken into account depending on the objectives of the study. So for example, climate change might also be an important one, because if you change for example, if you have a very strong climate change and the forest is dying anyway, well then maybe the scenario where you use more wood will be better than the one where you don't use the forest, because anyway it will die and the carbon will be released. Well, technological innovation is very important, because if you can imagine that the alternative, the fossil fuel based products are also trying to be much more efficient in energy. So if we need much less energy to make iron, well then maybe it will be more competitive, and wood will be less interesting with regards to carbon emissions. So this calls for, and demography also, does the consumption increase anyway, or does it only increase because we harvest more? All of this calls for dynamic substitution coefficients, to increase, to put some dynamic modeling, some projections of the evolution of these factors into our estimates of substitution. So we did, for example, for the study that I showed you before, what we are taking into account are these ones: the dynamics of the forest growth, the removals of biomass, the age and density structure, and the forest composition. And for example, if instead of just looking at the fraction that's composed of the forest sector, if you also include the forest boundaries, then you see that the substitution coefficients, they change a lot. Without the forest, if you average over all the products that we use, the lumber, pulp, and energy, we have a coefficient of substitution that's around 0.6 for the French wood sector. If you account for the effect on forest, you have a substitution coefficient that goes from minus 0.9 to 0.4. So it's much less, and what it says is that, well, in most cases, you don't avoid emissions by using wood, which is what we saw in the results of the other study. So if you use substitution one day, keep in mind that it's more than just a multiplicative coefficient. For example, many people average. They take meta-analysis of many life cycle and average all the coefficients. It doesn't make sense. Better to take the ones that's closest to your conditions. Forest must be accounted for. And also you need to be explicit about what's taken into account and what's not. More than taking everything into account, that's not always the goal or not always possible, but it should be clear what's going in the coefficients. So in the end, what drives the carbon balance? Now that I hope you've understood well what's in the carbon balance, what drives it? So basically, you have a unit of CO2 that enters in the forest through photosynthesis, then you have all the forest sectors that do things, and in the end, a fraction goes back to the atmosphere after the end of life, blah, blah, blah. Everything I said. So here we described the sequestration efficiency as a ratio of what comes out over what went in. To have an index of how efficient is the whole sector. So to do this, I built a simplified empirical model based on fractions valid over like averages for European forest, where you know for each unit of NPP, each unit of carbon that enters the forest ecosystem, how much is harvested, how much might be disturbed, so will be removed too. From how much you harvest, how much is left on floor as residues, and then the ecophysiology tells us what is the fraction that is respired back to the atmosphere. And the remaining, it's the growth of the tree, is how much carbon remains in the forest. And we account also for the substitution. And the interest of this model, that is very simple, is that we can do a lot of simulations. So we can vary a little bit the size of each of these boxes within the range of uncertainty that are reported. So we varied each of the parameters that define the whole forest sector to know which one has the most weight in the total efficiency of the sector. And what we found, so here you see at a time horizon of 25 years, see how much of the variance of the carbon balance is explained by each factor. So over 25 years, well, it's pretty balanced, but the main effect is the age effect. So that's the physiology. It's basically how much a young forest sequester more than an old forest. How efficient are the young forest? And then the forest sector, well, what do you do with the residues, how much you harvest, how much you substitute? It's still more than over 50%. But then when you increase with time, what happens is that climate change takes over completely. And over 100 years, well, it's explaining 70% of the total variance of the carbon balance. The reason for this is mainly that the total variance is increasing. So the variance due to each of these factors, they are remaining approximately constant, but the variance due to the uncertainty in climate change, this one is increasing a lot. Because of the uncertainty in climate change, in 100 years, we don't know if the forest will become a source or if they will remain a sink. So for example, if we detail the effect of harvest, so here you see the sensitivity of the climate change. So will the forest remain be an even stronger sink? Will they remain a sink? Do they decrease or do they become a source? See that if the forest remain at the current sequestration efficiency, well, you see that you have a better sequestration efficiency if you harvest less. It's a bit the same as we saw in the first study. But if the forest becomes less efficient at sequestering, that's a bit the example I was giving before, then there is no statistical significance. The effect of harvest, it won't change. It won't determine how much carbon we sequester in the end. So this all points to the importance of the response, the potential adaptation of European forest to climate change if we want to maintain the carbon balance. So instead of trying to increase the carbon sequestration of forests, maybe we should focus on keeping them sequestered at their current rate. And so that was all about carbon. So now we saw that there is a lot of effect from climate. But climate it has an effect on the forest. As we saw, it changes the sequestration potential, for example. It changes all the health of the forest. It's determinant to its growth. But the forest also has impacts on the climate through albedo, so how much energy is reflected, through transpiration, so it changes how much water goes back to the atmosphere. And when we signed the Paris Agreement, the goal wasn't to increase carbon sequestration. It was one of the goals, but the goal is to solve the climate change problem. So if you look in detail at the articles, what they say, translated in scientific language, is that we should reduce the radiative imbalance at the top of the atmosphere. That is to decrease the amount of energy that stays trapped. Increase the carbon storage in the forest sector. That's what we talked about. Decrease the surface temperature and not decrease the precipitation, to keep the conditions to live at the surface livable. So here we raise the question of, can we do all of that? Can forest management target all of these criteria at the same time? So for this we use a different type of model. It's called ORCID-ECAN. It's a quite complex model that solves the equations, the physical and biological equation of physics between soil and atmosphere. We run it over Europe, over pixels, over 50-kilometer pixel. We have 7 species, the 7 most important species of Europe, and the trees are described with diameter classes with 3 management styles: high stand, coppice, or no management. And there are harvest rules based on diameter and density. So with this model, we run scenarios for 90 years with climate change projections and to simulate changes in management. So we simulated 6 strategies on each pixel with the same initial conditions every time, but every time there was an option to change the management, we either did the same thing or not harvested when instead of harvesting, changed from coppice to high stand. Well, we tried all the combination of species deciduous conifer or high stand coppice. So here you see the initial condition for all Europe. So in Europe right now we have more conifers than deciduous and mainly high stand, a little bit of coppice and a little bit of unmanaged. And then we looked for, so in each pixel we looked at the effect of each management and we looked for the combination of all management options that would lead the maximum carbon sequestration and the ones that would lead to the minimum surface temperature. So what do you think? How would you change these distributions? How would you change the management to have higher carbon sequestration? Think more or less conifers, we live like that? Are we already sequestering the maximum? And do we harvest more or less, more coppice? An idea?
Even more conifers?
Yes. Yeah. To sequester more carbon, more conifers. They grow faster. Yeah, they are more efficient. And also harvest less. So that's again consistent with what we saw in the 2 previous studies. And now, how do we minimize the surface temperature? An idea? Yeah, so more deciduous and more coppice too. More deciduous, it's mainly due to the effect of snow in the Scandinavian areas, because the deciduous, they lose their leaves in winter, so they leave the snow available for the air for the light to be reflected on. So there is less heat that is trapped. Whereas with the conifers, the heat it's trapped because it's reflected, but it's reflected back. And the copies, it's also, also the deciduous are lighter. If you look at an aerial photo, you see that the deciduous, they are lighter than the broadleaves, than the conifers. And there's also an effect of water, of transpiration. But more in details. So this is the effects for the scenarios that minimize the surface temperature in February, March, so spring. So you see that that's where the cooling takes place, here and in the Alps. So that's where there is snow. And here you see the attribution of why this cooling to the different physical variables. And see that there is really a compensation of the different physical terms. You see the role of surface albedo here in green, and there is also an important role of atmospheric emissivity, so that's due to transpiration, to the amount of water in the atmosphere. So from this work, what we concluded is, what we highlighted is that carbon mitigation isn't climate mitigation. So when the objective is to mitigate climate, it should be clear that it's not only about reducing carbon, because when we manage forest, we not only change the carbon, we also change all the other properties of the surface. And also one important thing is that, anyway, I didn't highlight it before, but so here there is the trade-off that is very interesting, that it's not the same scenario that will minimize or maximize the two criteria, but also what you see here is that the effect is very small. The cooling, it's minus, on average over Europe, minus 0.03 degrees. So anyway, even if we do one or the other, the effect is very small. So it's not European forest management that's going to cool the climate. So yeah, the potential to mitigate climate change is limited and local rather than global. So overall, what we understood and what we highlighted from all these works on carbon and climate with forest management is that even if we change, so that here you see the global carbon balance since the 1900s. This is a land sink, so yeah, maybe we can increase it a little bit, but the climate change problem, it's a fossil fuel emissions problem. So instead of trying to, of course, the forest can play a part, and we should try not to increase this too much, but the problem is here, and there are emissions that we can cut without changing other properties and other ecosystem services. So basically, since decades, years, centuries, the forest is valued for wood production, but other services, cultural, biodiversity, water regulation. And since the Kyoto Protocol, it's a bit like climate and carbon have taken over the objectives of forest management. And maybe we should have something more balanced, like yes, there might be a role for climate and carbon, but it should only be part of the bigger picture of all the services that forests provide to us. And that's all I wanted to tell you today.
Thank you all for this very nice talk. Just, what do you think about this emerging debate dealing with natural climate solutions, that they have a lot of the mitigation options that many authors are proposing to expand a lot further this area, no? Then merging this with all these results, what do you think about this proposal of natural solutions? Yeah. And there's a big debate right now, no?
There are two things at least. Is that, well, here we only focused on forest management. So that is, we look at forests that are already forests, and we see if we cut them more or less to do something else. Then there is the increase in forest area. So that's different, and depends where you put it, because some ecosystems are also very important and everything, but most of the time, more forest area will be more interesting for many of the ecosystem services. But for me, the most important thing is to focus on all of these services. If we are to decide on what to do with the land, it's not only to look at are we going to mitigate climate change, but also how the ecosystem will adapt, will react to climate change, and what about the other services. Maybe it's worse for one ecosystem service, but we value more another one in this place. So yeah, it's really, I think, the multifunctionality that we need to focus on.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the overall like European forestry. That did you look into any status of carbon markets, how it might be affected, or it could be one of the parameters to be counted?
Well, right now the carbon market in Europe, it's not working well. I think the estimate is that to be an efficient motivation to reduce emissions, the price should be around 20 euros. And now I don't know how much it is, but between 3 and 5, I think. So right now it's really not working as it should. So I don't know, it's for economists to, I don't know if it's an efficient tool or not. Right now it's not working.
So you wouldn't think that so significant to be counted in this kind of prediction?
I think the problem with the carbon market is that there are many ecosystem services that don't have a price today, and I'm not sure we should put a price on them.
Exactly.
So I'm not sure, right now it's not working, and I'm not sure it's a solution. But it's not my React expertise.
But at a European level, but if it's being harvested elsewhere
at
a global level, it's not a solution.
But the risk is that it will focus even more on the carbon because it's easier to measure and I don't know if it's a solution or not.
Is there any other study like this in other types of forests, or like tropics or things like that?
Well,
would you have the same outcome?
It's over Europe and America and North America. There have been studies, and usually they find the same things. The ones that find different things, that find that you have a better carbon balance if you harvest more, usually it's because, well, they harvest more, but also they fertilize and also they do something else. In the tropics, the questions are very different because it's not at all the same filière, the same wood sector, the same transformation, and it's about deforestation. So, sorry?
It is because it grows to cropland when they kind of.
Yes, so it's a land. Yeah.
They just convert it.
Yeah, so it's deforestation. It's a forest that then is not a forest anymore, and often it's just burnt. The forest, they don't really use it. So the questions are very different. So deforestation, it's bad for all the ecosystem services anyway, in the tropics.
Yeah, I know that the carbon market in Europe, I was reviewing, and it's improving a little bit.
Okay.
So there's some hope. The prices are rising a little bit.
Okay.
And it had very big problems, but it's so there's some hope with the data on the last 3 years. So yeah, maybe it will work a little bit, not super well, but it's improving. And well, just to give some hope.
Yeah, I have a methodological question. Is that you talk about the substitution?
Yes.
And you said, for example, for 1 ton of wood, you have 0.5.
For 1 cubic meter of wood.
Yeah, and how do you calculate these substitutions? How do you know these coefficients?
Well, it's from the industry. So it's from the life cycle analysis. They have databases. There is the most famous one is EcoInvent, and you have emission factors for each stage of the production. So for a house, you know for each, depending on the floor that you put, how much emissions. So you count for all the emissions along your life cycle, and you do the same for a different product. and then you do the difference between the two. But it's really an accounting of the emissions of all the transformation process. You take your truck and you take it for that many kilometers. So yeah, it's life cycle analysis. They are very precise accounting, very detailed accounting of how much energy you use, how much emissions from the energy you use for each stage of the production process. Yeah.
And you can be you find this reliable and yeah.
The problem is it's reliable for one product, but the problem is that if you use it for another context, then it's not applicable anymore. So yeah, that it's the problem. So you can have uncertainty, you can have ranges. It's really interesting. There is a value, but it should be used with caution and trying to match the context of calculation with the context of application. That's mainly because not everyone can do the whole life cycle analysis. The study on France, it was not a question, it's an area. I wouldn't have done the whole life cycle analysis, the whole accounting for the whole wood harvest in France and the alternative. So it's too much work. So it's good that there is this tool, but it should be used with caution.
Anything else? More questions? So then, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you have time to go for the child party.